All right, welcome everyone to the Selectmen's meeting. It's actually a joint meeting with the Board of Selectmen, the School Committee, and the Finance Committee. Madam Clerk, would you like to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Now, on the small agenda today, like I had mentioned, it's a joint meeting. We're going to go over the 2016 operating budget, followed by the capital improvements plan and changes to the annual town meeting. Bonnie, can you lead us off and tell us where we were and where we are right now?
Sure. Right now, as the fiscal 2016 operating budget stands, we are in balance. There's a small surplus of about $1,500. Based on our last meeting, we were about $60,000 out of balance. What's happened since then is we've received the formal...
Be approved.
Well, it's pretty good. I was going to say the same thing. We're done.
People are cheering for you.
I think they thought you were going to give them the $1,500.
Since our last meeting, we did receive the final assessment from the Neshoba Tech. I was holding a figure of about $535,000. The actual assessment came in at $474,000, which was primarily due to decreased enrollment at the high school there, from 38 to 33 students per year. So that captured most of the deficit. The other thing that happened was we did meet with the school department staff, as the board directed at your last meeting. Keith Bergman, myself, Superintendent, and Steve Mark, the business manager, to go over solutions for the operating budget. We were able to come to an agreement that the $17,250,000 appropriation for the school 2016 budget would stand, in consideration of an additional $70,000 in capital to be provided for resource materials, books, and training for electronic type of resource materials. With that consideration, then the budget would essentially be balanced if we do that. The only way to accomplish the additional $70,000 would be to find it somewhere within the capital plan as it stands, and the recommendation here would be to just reduce the capital stabilization appropriation of $250,000 down by 70 to $180,000 to accomplish that. And that's really where we are.
Right, and we saw that the school committee had voted on Thursday night to adopt a budget that reflected those numbers. And since part of that involves taking an action to add a capital project, we wanted to do that before the warrant closes this Friday, and so that's why we asked for that you schedule a special meeting tonight so you can insert the $70,000 capital project onto the annual town meeting warrant and vote to recommend the operating budget at the level that the school committee is requesting.
Mr. Chairman, you have anything you want?
I just have one question of clarification based on what Bonnie just talked about. So, it sounds like it was a $61,000 reduction in the Neshoba Tech assessment, and then if we pull $70,000 out of what we voted, that's $131,000. But you were 60. No, I got it. Sorry, I'm okay.
Yeah, we were going into last.
Yep.
We have still about 60,000
Yep,
deficit.
Yep, I'm fine.
As of last Monday.
Yeah, so Keith's right, we did vote a budget on, we made a very complicated motion that was predicated on letting you guys go about your action tonight. If you go ahead and approve that $70,000 capital increase on the capital side for us, our motion will allow us to vote a budget of total spending of $18,322,797, of which $17,250,000 will be the town appropriation. We'll use $700,000 in circuit breaker, and we will project that we will use about $373,000 in school choice to get to our total spending number of $18,322,797.
And I did watch the India meeting, and that was a long motion, with a lot of discussion.
I was taking notes, I had to make a table.
Well, both sides of
It
it.
was Chuck.
It was very helpful, it was very helpful, the level of detail in the motion. Appreciate that.
Chairman of the FinCom, Betsy, anything you want to mention?
I just have a question for Bonnie.
Yes.
When we did a similar thing for Park and Rec, you had you managed to bring that money out without taking it out of what had already been appropriated for capital. And I thought there was some indication there might have been some more money, wherever that came from, available for this.
No, what I did is when I first started with the capital recommendations, we can use up to 2.5% of the operating budget on capital, which is available from the undesignated fund balance. I started at like 2% because I knew there's always things that get added in at the end, and this happened to be the recreation one. So with the recreation 50,000, I was at the max.
Okay.
So now we need to kind of cover it out of what we've got appropriated already.
One comment that we did have when we talked about this on Thursday was that while this budget works for us, we are effectively capped out right now in terms of our use of our incoming circuit breaker and our incoming school choice funds. We will end up with a balance of around 650. We're going to end FY 2015 with about 643,000 in school choice. And based on the numbers that we're projecting, we'll go up slightly, like 655,000. But the current trend of us using, our revolving funds in terms of circuit breaker and school choice, if we use more than that, we're going to start whittling away at that balance that we have in there, which will make it more difficult for us to meet unexpected expenditures in the middle of a fiscal year. The other concern that we have is that our appropriation from the town went up $550,000, but our expenses went up significantly more than that. That's not a sustainable model where our expenses outstrip the increase in appropriation. Hopefully, our expenses won't go up as rapidly as they did this year. We saw a significant increase in our SPED out-of-district tuition expenses, which we've been talking about, since November. That we hope is an aberration in that it won't rise as quickly. But, if our expenses rise again this much, we do not have any capacity to absorb that through revolving funds other than whittling down that balance. We've always talked about, in the years that I've been on the school committee, a balance of around $750,000 to $1 million there for our revolving funds is what we were all comfortable with as boards. We're below that now, and to cut into that would take us farther down. So just two areas of concern that we need to be cognizant of as we move forward, especially if the news does not look rosier from the revenue side next year. We'll just have to see how it plays out.
Board members?
I just wanted to ask FinCom, what their assessment of drawing a capital stabilization fund. I mean, that's where we're going to get this. So what are the implications of that?
I wasn't in any of the discussions, so I'm sort of asking questions that may have already been answered. But the question I would have is this a one-time expedient fix of a one-time issue? Or is this a bit of a change in philosophy where going forward the schools will expect the town to spend capital funds on basically books and training for teachers for new programs? If it's a one-time expedient, patch on a one-time issue, I don't have a huge problem with it. But if it's a change in philosophy where we're going to be drawing capital funds down to support the operating budget for the schools, I think that needs more discussion. So I don't know what the answer is, I'm asking that as a...
We can ask Bonnie, but it was my impression it was a one-time thing that solved this year's dilemma.
I think this was an issue that was debated a couple of years ago when we appropriated money for textbooks. I think it was in 2010 out of the capital plan. So it's my understanding that this was, an expense that needed to happen this year. It hadn't happened before, so it was appropriate coming out of capital because we had paid for books in the past. We had used these funds for those types of materials. And it seemed
Okay, so we can expect this again.
Well,
right.
what I would add to that is the school department didn't ask us to take money out of the capital to do this. We've done this to balance the budget.
Right.
Okay, so I don't know if there's any expectations. The expectations from my standpoint is that next year, we're going to start working the budget earlier, and we're going to do some more formatting and have more information so we can have these discussions way earlier, and we're not in this mode where we have to do something because we're this close to town meeting. And I think that's, from my standpoint, that's where we really are with going forward. This is a one-time thing to me to balance the budget this year.
And I'm okay with it.
But that's
I just,
the
I
world according
didn't
to
know
Betsy
whether
Bowling, I guess, at the
discussions
moment.
had been held where it was an ongoing, an ongoing expectation going forward, that's all.
Wait, before we go back out, apologies.
Bonnie, what was our goal to put money into the stabilization fund, capital stabilization fund?
We originally started with 350 because that was
Maybe percentage would start at
1%.
1%, how much would we put?
1% of the expenditures for capital annually.
Yeah,
And how much are we gonna put in that?
10, 15, 20,
Yeah, it's
it's a much higher percentage.
much higher.
Last year, we only put 10,000 or so into it.
Around 14.
So the goal was a number, and we're actually putting substantially more in than that
Yes.
goal.
Correct.
The money's not coming out of the stabilization fund. The money's coming out of money that was allocated to go into the stabilization fund.
Correct.
Okay,
Right.
I need to characterize this
That-
correctly.
That's not the question, Paul.
No,
It's still
no.
capital money. It's still capital money.
Thing is, if our goal was 1%, and we were gonna put more than that, and we still are putting more than that, it becomes a factor of when the initial planning is done, is how is the money divvied up through various pots and buckets, if you will. I've got no complaint that the way Bonnie did it, but the thing is, let's characterize this correctly. And that was a rather larger sum than the goal was put into the capitalization to be deposited bucket. Rather than putting all that in, which is still more than the goal was going to go in there, we did this. If we could have simply done it, 3 months ago, pick any time frame you want in this budget cycle, that we would have said the schools or any other department's going to get X amount, and the capital stabilization fund's going to get $100,000, just numbers out of the air. And that would have made this math exercise isn't even happening today, if that had been the case.
Right.
Well, to me, the
And
question
I
isn't,
don't want to put words in Bonnie's mouth, if I just may. Have I mischaracterized the situation?
No.
Okay.
to me, the question isn't, does it go in the capital stabilization fund or not? The fact is, we're using capital money for what some would say is an operating expense. And whether it goes in the stabilization fund or whether it uses to buy another police car, it's going, rather than capital, it's going to something that's more, could be characterized as operational. We have other things in capital that are in that same category. I think the tires for the police cars, I think, are in there. There are some other
Police,
things.
fire,
So it's not
highway.
completely out of line, but it's important that we have the conversation and people understand.
And if I'm mistaken, go ahead and correct me very quickly, but my understanding is the money was allocated before we voted on the budget towards the capitalization fund to be deposited into it, at a much higher amount than our goal is.
That's
each
true.
year.
In terms of the stabilization fund, that's
So-
true.
So had we, instead of, at some point in the exercise over these last few months,
Mm-hmm.
put it against that and left it somewhere in the budget to be used for operating expenses,
But that wouldn't happen,
No,
though.
it wouldn't.
That wouldn't happen. That's the whole point.
Yeah, because we had $2 million that was for capital, which would have been simply departmental projects. But rather than spend all of it was 1.9 million, whatever it was, 1.9 million. Instead of spending all of it on projects, made the conscious decision to stop spending at a certain level, $1.5 million or whatever, and take the remainder, which at the time was 350, and move it into capital stabilization to pay for capital projects in a future year. It's all for capital, whether now or later, it's for capital. And you're right, all we're doing now is taking money which was in the mix for capital, and we're carving it out for a $70,000 capital project. That because the board had already voted to put an article in at a certain number, 250, for capital stabilization, we have to reduce that article from 250 to 180 in order to access the 70. But it's all from the same source, it's all from the capital money that we started out with.
And I believe that 350 wasn't just a number that came up with, that was a specific one-time number we got from,
Yeah, short-term borrowing. or
right? It was short-term
debt.
borrowing, so it was a specific thing that wouldn't have even normally been in the capital plans. We said, let's take the opportunity and put that aside. So,
I'm having a problem reconciling
Chris?
what Bonnie has said.
Yeah, so I'm opposed to the whole thing because we're basically tapping our capital project money to offset our deficit and our operating expenses. We have the $70,000 isn't for any particular project, there's no $70,000 project. Although they can use it for textbooks and whatever, it's not on their capital list, but we're using it to basically offset what we have a deficit in our operating expenses. That's not gonna go away next year. We're gonna have to find that $70,000 someplace else. But I think the biggest issue I'm looking at is, as Mike was alluding to, this, he needs $750,000 as a potential offset reserve for what they overexpend in their budget, which goes right to the problem, what I've been pointing out all along, which is the 17 million, 18 million in the operating is not even the whole picture. They still spend 3 million outside of their operating account, which is their operating expenses, which is what they need this remaining circuit breaker money for.
No, we
athletics,
don't,
bus fees.
we don't need that for that.
They
That
fund
is-
all that.
That's an erroneous statement, Chris.
Well, when
That's
we
a
put it like
totally
this with
erroneous
bus
statement.
fees, for instance, they
The
collect
bus fees go
fees.
to offset the transportation
Right,
costs.
right, and which is in your operating expense, is an operating expense.
Yep.
That offset's supposed to be built in the operating budget, it's not. Athletics, same thing, all those offsets are supposed to be built in the operating budget. So you're supposed to project athletics and bus fees, so say you project 150,000 for athletics and you collect 180. That $30,000 you can use to fund this hole we have in the operating expense.
No, we can't.
That's
We
those sort of
can't.
things you need to be doing. And the way you're budgeting now is you're putting the town at risk because you've got essentially $3 million worth of operating expenses outside the operating account, and you need $750,000 reserve to cover that. I mean, and here we are with a $90,000 operating deficit, and we're gonna tap capital? It just doesn't make any sense.
I'm not sure where to dig in on all of that. The $750,000 is specifically designed primarily to meet increases in sped spending that occur after we've budgeted when either more children move into the district that require services, or if our vendors raise their rates during the year, which has happened in the past. That is specifically what that money is earmarked for. It's not earmarked for athletics or busing or food, and frankly, we don't use it for that. We never have and we never will. So in terms of that money being required to offset our operating budget, it is when we have unexpected expenditures in a particular account primarily, that's what we use it for. And that's always been the case. It's understood by all three of these boards, and it's not a mystery. In terms of the things that we don't put into the operating budget when we do our budgeting, we project our athletic fees and our busing fees and we have updates several times a year on how much we take in for lunch and food fees and how much our costs are. We do all of that. We do it all the time. That's what our staff does, and we talk about it during the year. The money that we take in those particular accounts has to go right back into those things. You take in lunch fees, they gotta go for food service. You take in athletic fees, they gotta go to athletic costs. We have no
Where do you pay for
flexibility in that
athletics?
regard.
What do you pay for athletics?
Let's continue.
Yeah. So that's the way we've always operated. It's not a mystery. It's well understood by everybody here.
Alex, you had a question?
I did. I want to back up a step. And you said that you had this increase this year is unanticipated. And in a later statement, you said, well, we have a problem going ahead because this model's not sustainable. And so I guess my comment is neither is the way we're solving the problem. We have huge capital programs coming up that we have to deal with. We got ourselves in a lot of trouble because we didn't do capital years ago, and we've been trying to make up for it. It drove the debt up terribly, and we're setting ourselves up. Now, you said something else, and understand, I'm not against what you want in your budget. I'm 100% for that. I want to make sure that we finance this in a way that leaves a future for your department and all the rest of these departments, and a sustainable model. So you identified that sped was one of the primary drivers this year. Has there been a year that sped did not increase?
No.
It increases every year.
And we project an increase every year.
Okay.
And we budget an increase every year based on the analysis that we do.
We can't avoid this discussion a year from now. Well, I'll avoid it a year from now, but the rest of you are going to have to. So, it's, you know, you look ahead, you got 1 point something million for a ladder truck, you got a fire station you got to build, and you got to do all this. We're not operating in a sustainable fashion. And to Chris's point, we need to make sure that we don't merge the lines between capital, one-time money, and operating money. So even though you get the money from a different source, it's still money you need to operate. It's not capital.
The money,
There's only
the
two ways to spend money.
$70,000 will be used on capital. It will not be used on operating expenses. There are many things that we spend money on that historically have been in the operating budget because that's the way we've done it, but you can make an argument that a computer server is not an operating budget. It has depreciation, obsolescence, it lasts for years. It's a capital item. It's a smallish capital item relative to a fire truck, but it meets the definition. There are any number of things that we could look at and say, those could be capital, you know? And we won't use it on training, we won't use it on salary. That's not, what we will do is take the money that we would have used on something that could be classified as capital and use capital for it, and take the opportunity to use the money that we would have used for that thing in our operating budget and pay a salary or pay for training, you know, ongoing type of items that are legitimately operational and can only be defined as operational.
As part, and this is to you, Bonnie, as part of what we accomplished to balance the budget, is that capital money we're now putting in towards that effort have specified what that expense will be?
I'm sorry, for this
Is
particular?
it restricted to just capital, or is it like a lot of capital money where to buy this, this, and this?
It's declining debt service is accumulated and only spent on one-time or capital expenditures. What I was going to bring up is I think that it would be helpful for the financial policies group to address defining what capital is going forward, because it is vague. There are capital articles that appear every year for highway, for police, for fire, that are for facility or infrastructure maintenance. Maybe defining that in the policy will help going forward. But for this exercise, what I did is look back at what we did in the past. We have funded articles like this in the past through capital.
But they've specified something specific.
They specified for
School
textbooks.
textbooks, other resource materials, and for engaging services for
Yeah.
teacher training.
Correct. So this funding could only be used for that type of expenditure. You know, we've done it in the past. Whether, you know, the boards agree with it or not, it has, you know, it has some history to it, but I think that firming up the definitions within the policies might be helpful going forward.
And is there any other way this year to solve the problem? Because I think that makes good sense. Short term, this is how we solve the problem. Long term, we get clearer definitions on how things should go. You guys already identified your top 2 problems that you want to go tackle, so you've got parallel paths here. But I don't know, is there any other way to?
There's another way to solve it, absolutely. You
Just
have to
don't
cut the operating
be-
budget
yeah.
somewhere. And, you know, typically that results in staffing
Yeah.
differences, so.
Board, anything else? Paul, I didn't cut you off tonight, you were saying something before.
I just wanted clarification, because I asked Bonnie if I mischaracterized it, and I thought you said I did not.
Based on what I heard, maybe I misunderstood, but
All right, let's let it pass. The only other question, was there any other discussion subsequent to the last Board of Selectmen meeting on any other source of funding? Excise taxes, anything else?
no, I mean, I've reviewed all of the major excise commitment came in just this month, and I am projecting over what the commitment is, so I'm hoping that we'll get other stragglers, so there's no, excise was the last component of my revenue analysis, and there's no money
Yeah, no, my
there.
question was just, was there any other discussion? That was it. Okay. Thank you.
Anything else?
You ready for a motion? Yeah. Move that the Board of Selectmen vote as follows relative to the certain articles in the May 4, 2015 annual town meeting warrant. 1, recommend Article 4, 2016 operating budget in a total amount of $37,598,937, including appropriation of $17,250,000 for the school department. 2, increase Article 7, FY 2016 capital items available funds from $1,600,811 to $1,670,811 by adding $70,000 for school textbooks, resource materials, and training. 3, decrease Article 12, capital stabilization fund by $70,000 from $250,000 to $180,000.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion?
Just who's got that action to make sure we define those, the capital item definition?
Jim and I are on the financial policy with the group.
Excellent. That's it.
Is that tomorrow night?
It is, isn't it?
Perfect.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed?
Thank you.
Do we have to do anything with it? The motion takes care of town meeting, so we're all set then?
It takes care of all of the warrants and all the changes. Editorially, we could let you know that the Water Department is amending its request to reduce the total package by $200,000, so we will so reflect in that warrant article. And also, the planning board had voted on Thursday night to insert a zoning article on non-conforming structures that have been recommended by town council, so that will be in the warrant too. Planning board is not doing inclusionary zoning. They're gonna, for the spring, they're gonna wait and do that for the fall.
So what article placeholder do we have for the non-conforming structures?
You have the article as drafted by town council in the warrant for non-conforming structures.
Did we insert that already?
Yeah, the planning board voted
Oh, they did.
to, on Thursday night. So, and that's to take it, take cognizance of a recent appeals court decision which changes the way the court looks at non-conforming structures. And the town council was agreeable that we should amend the zoning bylaw to appropriately reflect what the law is. So we'll have a briefing packet on that. The planning board will have its public hearing on April 9th for that zoning amendment.
It's Article 17, Jim.
Is it? Oh, okay.
You all set?
Make a motion to adjourn?
Second.
Alan?
I'd like to have an item added to Article 3, FY 2016 revolving funds. I've had a discussion with Bonnie about this afternoon. The cable department is in discussion with the town of Boxborough. Been going on for some time. It looks like we may be coming to some agreement shortly for us to run their cable operation. They will pay us a certain amount of money every year out of their cable fund to do that. If we agree to do that, the check they cut to the town of Littleton should flow to the cable account for our expenses and wages. The way it's done right now, if it came to the town, it would be general fund. Bonnie would probably have to come up with the language, but we need to have something relative to that under revolving funds in the annual town meeting this year, so that that does happen.
Operating article.
Pardon?
You have it as a source of funding for their budget in the operating article?
The fees haven't been negotiated yet. We
Yeah.
don't know what it's going to equate to.
When do you see this taking effect, Alan?
sometime between now and town meeting,
Oh, really, that soon,
I
though?
think so. It's possible.
Is that something that would be better handled in the special?
Well, if we haven't worked out any of the details and the warrant closes in two days,
Well,
you're not gonna run out of
put
money.
placeholders in.
we can
all the
we can
time.
certainly time it so that the Foxborough doesn't pay us the money until it goes where we want it to go. So
But-
if we
but
wanted to bring it to a
that's
fall
perfectly
special,
fine
if
with
we
me,
wanted to
too.
bring it to a fall special town meeting, we could certainly have, we could, I think it'd be important to work out the details and just hearing about it.
No, that's perfectly fine with me as long as we understand that there is gonna be a need for this.
Sure.
Isn't there I mean, we have contracts with our cable providers that stipulate the money, where the money goes. When you're writing this contract, can't town council stipulate in the contract agreed by your commission in the town of Boxborough to have the same type of arrangement instead of even going
We
to town?
contractually call them
Agreed.
PEG funds, then they only
Well,
go
they,
one place.
they have to expend them as PEG funds,
Yeah.
Right,
because that's what they get from Comcast and Verizon, for
and
instance.
we should accept them as same.
But,
Right.
but when they cut the check, unless we have something like I'm proposing,
Yeah.
it goes to the general fund.
Yeah, I mean, if it's coming from the town of Boxborough, if it's not coming from Comcast or Verizon specifically for PEG funds, it's coming from another town. I can't trace their ledger and,
All I'm saying, maybe we can do it contractually, that's all. I'm just asking whether or not town council, if it's legal to do it contractually instead of, so you can,
Do we even know that putting it in the revolving fund is the right thing to do?
at this point, we don't
Need
have
the
any.
answer right now? No, we don't know, so we need more time. I think we have the common goal that the money that's being provided by your department should go back to what, to where it comes from. And I think it would take us more time than we have before the meeting adjourns to figure out what the right thing to do.
No, I think having it done at the fall town meeting and making sure that we don't receive any payment prior to that.
I'm sure Boxborough will gladly pay us in November rather than in July. So
We won't have
so we can contractually.
It doesn't
see
bother
to
me
it.
at all.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure
Yeah, and we can-
that when the check comes, somebody doesn't say to me, well, you should have thought of that before, you know?
We'll happily work on that
Thank you.
for the fall town meeting.
I'll just keep it. But if they give you a check, just keep it.
A little revolving.
all right, anything else?
Can I just ask a question?
Go ahead.
I'm not sure how to address. I'm just curious, as a novice citizen, if the school district wanted to increase services somehow, whether it be for saying, this is just stuff that has been put out there by families, having full-day kindergarten, something of that effect, which completely changes services and increases them. What is the process that happens to increase the budget so that, the operating budget to allow for something like that to happen? How does that work? Because obviously, operating budget is operating budget. How does that get requested or increased? What is the process to follow?
If you're talking about for the purposes of the question, if you're talking about the needing more money for the operating budget than we have from our existing resources, there are two ways to do it. One is by cutting everyone else's budget, or by getting an override of Proposition 2.5, which, in order to get the ballot question, it requires a 4/5 vote of the Board of Selectmen, even to bring that matter before the voters. And the only other time that I'm aware of that Littleton did it back in 2005, I think, it was with, a common understanding that there was a need that needed to be addressed, and this is the strategy to do it. So it's not something that could come up in isolation. I mean, the way that the three boards are working closely together now to bring a balanced budget forward, that such a discussion should not come up in isolation with any one board. It would need to be part of a group think and a group agreement, because at the end, because even if the official town officials agreed that that was something that needed to be done. It's still the voters
Right, of course.
that decide, and you don't want to ask the voters to do something unless everyone believes that it's the right thing to do.
And how are operating budgets currently determined? Is it just a percentage of, I mean, I don't even understand truly how the budgets are already divvied up as current operating budgets and how those potentially shift or never shift. I mean, how is that currently done?
The policy that the selectmen set this year was to prepare level staffing budgets. That is to look at what the cost for next year would be of the existing level of staffing throughout town government. And those are, in most cases, that meant an increase. In some few cases, it might have meant a slight decrease or the same dollar amount. But that's, I mean, ultimately, where you have an elected school committee, elected board of selectmen, finance committee overseeing the whole budget pie, it's almost like treaty negotiations. It's like reaching an agreement on what works for everyone, because the pie is only so big. And the agreement we reached this year was to level staff the budgets.
And how does level staffing work in a system, or like the schools where if there's a change in mandate and they're forced to create a program that may not exist, are they required to still have level staffing in that case? Or is there some consideration of, because it's something that's mandated or required, that they have to, that they can still request increased staffing because of that mandate, or it just doesn't matter?
Made it work this year when we put chapter 222 in. Same kind of thing, they got that in. As long as it's in their requests, we figure out how to fund it, right? Now, what you guys did this year with chapter 222 is a unfunded mandate or something the state was making you put in, and you put it on your budget, so that's how it's supposed to work.
Well, so you're saying that they can increase staff if necessary, even if it's a level staff?
Well, I don't know about increasing staff, but just
Well, I'm just,
unfunded
again, I'm just trying to
Well, I'm saying-
understand the process.
The explanation that I gave applies to how the town budget is. And while the selectmen don't have the authority to set the budget goal for the schools set the budget goals for the schools. However, it's still a finite budget pie. We're all feeding from the same trough. And the agreement that we came to tonight recognizes that the selectmen had certain goals which we could meet. The school committee, in adopting a budget, had we conclude, met its goals, the goals that it set for itself.
So there isn't usually a discussion about that piece of it?
Starts in
I don't-
November. Yes, it starts very early in the year.
Okay.
We actually spend a whole day on a Saturday going through everyone's budget, what they propose and what can actually happen, and it continues. We try to avoid what's happening right now and have it done so it's not last minute.
Right, no, and I'm aware that there have been meetings.
This is about a month earlier than we reached
Yeah,
agreement
no,
last
I
year.
mean,
That's
I've
pretty good.
kind of followed this from past years, but again, I was just trying to understand that process a little bit better.
Because at the end of the day, we're all in this together, as we were telling the superintendent the other day, if the schools have a budget problem, we have a budget problem. The town has a budget problem, and we're in it together, and we're going to solve the problems together.
No, I understand, I just feel, it seems like, from the little that I understand, that the schools are an entity which tend to be different than the rest of the other budget systems in town because of these mandates that come down on the schools from the state and the federal government. You know, I don't often see anything happening that the police department is forced to do something because the state has decided it's going to change the way they do business.
That does happen.
You
just pay attention to the schools.
State government has always given us stuff.
That's all.
Do you request staffing as needed, then, I assume?
It does, it's not, the thing is, it's not always additive. What we always, all the departments, even with the level staffing, the discussion is, what are your priorities, what you need to do? And maybe there's some new things you need to do that you add, and maybe you have to get rid of some other things. That's always, I mean, it's just like at home. It's always, and that's the discussion, always.
Yeah.
So it's the same for the schools as for everybody else. The schools it's a bigger part of the budget. So, you know, they're off this much, or they grow this much, and percentage-wise, we just feel it more.
Right. Well, 'cause it's
So
a
we're all
much
in it
bigger
together, but
piece of the
everybody
bill.
deals with the same thing. There's always more mandates, there's always more state requirements, whether it's even just the playground safety. I mean, it's down to those level of things. We have to do this because now it's required. So it is across the board, it really is.
Okay.
So everybody's trying, and everything.
No, and I don't doubt that. I truly don't
Yeah.
doubt that. I mean, I'm constantly working a budget in my own home.
Right,
Which
yeah.
is not as simple as people may think. So I do get that piece. I'm just trying to understand how it works, because it is a much bigger problem, obviously, across the town. We have so many more facets to it, which every piece of it is important. Certainly safety, fire, it's all very, very important, and how to figure out, you know, how, if there's ever a chance of, you know, change.
Well, you know, people look at this point coming in and they view it as more revenue, but the point with more stores and more restaurants and more bars is gonna be more police. So there is no magic answer to this, or somebody would have already said, okay, let's do that.
All right, let's cut it up there.
Okay, thank you.
Make a motion to adjourn. Moved in second, all those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you for watching.
Thank you, guys.